Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name again is Tim Sawyer. I'm the president and co-founder of Crystal Clear Digital Marketing, and we are grateful for you taking the time to join us this afternoon. We've got a really important, kind of weighty subject we want to discuss this afternoon. As we promoted, we're going to talk about the new AmSpa guidelines and the potential impact on your practice and the industry at large. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Out of the gate, I want to address what should be the biggest question on everyone's mind, which is, why are we doing this? And I want to be clear out of the gate that I am grateful to Warren Danforth and Harry Nelson for joining us today. They are giving of their time. Nobody is getting paid for the time we're taking today. There's no profit motive in this. The motives are simple, and I wrote a few notes because I wanted to make sure that I got this right. Number one, we're all heavily vested in this community, in this industry. Crystal Clear alone has more than 200 medical spa clients out of the 400 clients that we serve. It's a huge constituency in our business. So things that affect the medical spa industry and that affect the individual medical spa in turn affect Crystal Clear. So we're heavily vested. Historically, Crystal Clear has been, for 7 years prior to COVID, the #1 largest financial supporter of the American Medical Spa Association. We also contribute to the American Academy of Facial Aesthetics that works with not only dentists, but a huge constituency of medical spas. So we're vested not only in time, attendance, but also in our financial resources, and we believe in the space. We want everyone to have an opportunity to contribute to the conversation, to have a voice. That's the biggest thing, right? Is that it's a community and everybody's voice should be heard. And we want to create a mechanism for that today. This is going to be recorded. We will be releasing this post, so early next week across social media channels. We'll also be releasing it on my podcast, True to Form. We encourage you to check that out. And we believe what's good for one medical spa is good for all medical spas, and most importantly, they should be treated equally. So here's our agenda. From 3 to 3:30, I'm going to have my good friend on, Harry Nelson. He's a founding partner, Nelson Hardiman, healthcare lawyers, probably one of the largest leading healthcare attorneys in the United States, located in California. Leading healthcare attorney Harry unpacks the new guidelines and what this could mean for you and your practice. We're going to do that from 3 to 3:30. 3:30 to 4, we've got my good friend and MedSpa, longtime OG MedSpa owner, Warren Danforth, who's going to talk about the potential consequences to med spa owners and patients of overregulation, turf wars. Warren has penned an open letter discussing the subject. It is well thought out. We're going to make that available to everybody post this event. And then we're going to all get on at 4 o'clock. Take any questions that you have. We want to get your questions answered. So make sure, if you want to write them down in advance, that's great. And be ready to discuss those at 4 o'clock. And then from 4:30 to 5, we're going to talk about some practical ways that you can grow your business post-COVID, some lessons that we've learned by working with the fastest growing medical spas in the country. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to Harry, I believe, is going to go first. He's the founder and managing partner of Nelson Hardiman, the largest healthcare specialty law firm in Los Angeles. Beyond his legal expertise, Harry is known nationally as a leader at the intersection of healthcare law and business, and has served on the boards of directors of multiple successful healthcare ventures. Immersed in healthcare innovation, he works and speaks on cutting-edge issues and the future of healthcare. This includes significant work in aesthetic medicine. Harry led the development of the American Med Spa Association content from 2015 to 2018, and has been cited by the state of California as an authority for his expert testimony on relevant regulatory issues. The Medical Board of California and Board of Barbering and Cosmetology have requested Harry's input and guidance in a task force to formulate their approaches to cosmetic medical devices. Harry is the author of 2 best-selling books, The United States of Opioids, Liberating a Nation in Pain, and From Obamacare to Trump Care, a survey of healthcare policy leading up to the Affordable Care Act and a prediction for the future direction of U.S. healthcare. Harry's thought leadership continues to drive innovation throughout healthcare. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend, Harry Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Great to be with everybody today. and looking forward to using the next 25 minutes or so to talk about the new AmSpa guidelines. Just to give you a little background on my perspective, I've been working as a lawyer advising med spas and other cosmetic providers, cosmetic device manufacturers, and other kinds of products manufacturers on a whole range of compliance issues that come up. A lot of time spent on resolving problems with the FDA and giving proactive guidance on how to stay in compliance with the FDA, stay in compliance with corporate practice of medicine rules, supervision and scope of practice of the individuals working in the med spa setting, and other compliance issues. I want to say up front that I've been very involved with AmSpa, as Audrey noted. I was one of their primary presenters from the beginning, from the early days of the organization. For many years, I was their counsel in California, and actually extended for a period of time across all their states, and had, with other lawyers from my firm, put hundreds of hours into developing some of their content at a very early stage. So when I speak today, I speak with some knowledge about AmSpa, some concerns that I'll share, but also I want to make it clear up front that I do regard AmSpa as being a positive force in the industry, and I hope that this program will be one that brings people together. I consider Alex Thiersch, the founder of AmSpa, to be a friend, a colleague, and I hope that this will be taken as respectful feedback in helping the industry move forward, and possibly reconsidering some of the content that's been put out there. I have, a lot of my experience has been in cases, and I'll share some of that perspective today. I did have one of the things that has influenced my thinking the most was spending time with the professional staff of the Medical Board of California, as well as the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, in trying to navigate many of the issues that emerge around med spa that have been confusing. And I think some of the confusion that is perpetuated in the AmSpa guidelines is it's not it's been around for a long time, and it's something that confounds not only people who are trying to deliver med spa services, but also the very government regulators who are responsible to police them. So with that, let's jump in. I just, as a lawyer, always feel obligated to say this is not legal advice. This is my comments here are intended to be educational. And one of the things I want to emphasize the most is that one of the challenges with regard to the AmSpa guidelines is that the relevant laws, regulations, and guidance and enforcement of the law are constantly in flux and highly variable from state to state. So with my comments should be taken with that in mind. So I want to say just a quick word before diving into about why I think this matters so much. At a regulatory level, there is a intense focus on med spas by licensing boards and by government. And part of the reason for that is that in a time when most healthcare services are partially regulated by the insurance system, whether that's through a government program like Medicare, or whether through private insurance, they're not direct to consumer. So I think the fact that MedSpa is a direct to consumer service that is growing substantially year over year makes it a topic of interest, and a place where states, particularly state boards, feel they need to step in as policemen, so to speak, to avoid consumer practices that are not protective of consumers. I think that there's a perspective that health plans, health insurance companies offer oversight, and hospital medical staffs offer a level of oversight, but then in the small practice setting of a simple med spa, there's nobody watching, and they need to watch more carefully. There have also been a lot of concerns about hotspot areas of when is an organization potentially engaged in the unlicensed practice of medicine, when are there business relationships that are inappropriate, when is there too much autonomy or practice outside of the scope. So those have been hot issues, particularly in a number of the larger states. We've seen that certainly here in California. We've seen a growing number of undercover investigations and task forces, and we've seen that this area of healthcare, like many others, has been an area where there have been complaints, and both from patients and clients and from employees. And so the bottom line is that there's been a demonstrated public interest in making sure that med spas are operating appropriately, and that I think that's an important context when we talk about med spas. So when we talk about med spas, we're really talking about a few high-level risk issues, and these are all issues that are talked about in the guidelines. And generally, from my perspective, the hot issues that med spas need to be thinking about are corporate practice of medicine, right? Meaning, how is the practice structured? What are the relationships with the physicians, the financial relationships between physicians and non-physicians, and that's a hot issue, and that's a state law issue. You also have a major federal law issue, which is FDA compliance with respect to all of the medical devices that are part of med spa practice, right? The lasers, the non-ablative devices, all of those devices are federally regulated. This is actually a place I want to talk about where I think the guidelines sort of miss a key piece that needs to be unpacked and understood. Supervision and scope of practice is the other. I would say that those are the top three issues that just come up over and over again. What supervision does each level of personnel need? What is the person's scope of practice within the med spa? And that's the third area I'm going to talk about where I think the AmSpa guidelines are potentially off base and need some hopefully some reconsideration. There are other issues I'm not going to talk about that I don't think are as pertinent to this program, but they come up that I just wanted to note. The issue of kickbacks and fee splitting, which is sort of a related point to corporate practice of medicine, and the issue of appropriate marketing. And of course, it's important always to point out that med spas face a whole series of business risks that are not unique to med spa in the way that the issues I spoke about a minute ago were, right? These issues of general risks like appropriate compliance with employment practices, compliance with HIPAA and data privacy and security, professional liability issues that arise in every area of healthcare, and OSHA. OSHA used to be the kind of the last concern on everyone's minds until the pandemic sort of changed that. So I think whenever you're talking about a healthcare business, and this applies to med spa, the key questions that you need to look at have very state-specific answers, right? I can tell you as a lawyer I'm licensed in 3 states, in Illinois, Hawaii, and California, but asked to give guidance around the country, that the bottom line is that there are key regulatory questions that need to be answered at a state-specific level, and those are: what organizational structure do we need to work? What does the ownership need to look like? If there's going to be a management relationship, what does that look like? What agreements do we need? That's the kind of the first structural point. Then when you get onto an operational level, you need to start asking questions that are, again, state specific. What personnel need what kind of licensing or what kind of certification to do what service? What are those limits on their scope of practice? Where does the line end between what a nurse can do versus a nurse practitioner? What's the line on what unlicensed people, estheticians can do? What supervision requirements are imposed? Again, high variability state to state here, dramatic variability. And finally, what kind of documentation requirements need to be complied with, and what other safety standards need to be met? These are the key questions that need to be asked and that need to be considered for every med spa on an ongoing basis. So when we talk about these things, part of the challenge of trying to put together guidelines in the first place is that we're not just talking about a static system. We're talking about a system of evolving rules. And those rules I listed here, I think it's important to think about the way that this process happens. Whenever we have laws, that means that a legislative body, either Congress at the federal level or your state legislature, has passed the law. In the federal context, the president has signed it into law, or in your state context, the governor has signed it into law. Those are the clearest and most heavily vetted set of laws, right? Then we have regulations, which are promulgated on a regular basis as seen to be appropriate by the agencies themselves, right? Medical boards in the states, cosmetology boards in the states, and it's a very fluid process, right? Essentially, the process is that at both the federal and state level, the agency has to give notice of the regulations it's considering, it doesn't. No one votes on them. They get put out. They receive comments from the public, from anybody who wants to give feedback, and then they get finalized. And those are much looser, and they're constantly coming out. And it's the place where you really need to be paying attention. Then you have this whole area where state medical boards and other regulators have opinions about how things should be operating that are not regulations, right? These are just the way that they think about what should be done. That they don't, for one reason or another, they're not going to put into regulation, but they publish a guidance, and you have to decide what to do with that. And the trickiest thing is enforcement. And by enforcement, I mean when you actually get a letter, a knock on the door, an unannounced visit, and you have a problem on your hands because a government entity has decided that there is that there's something going wrong that needs to be addressed, and that's really where the rubber meets the road. And and these things are constantly evolving. So I wanted to say, like, when you think about these guidelines and where we need to be concerned about them, it's like the places where things could go wrong. I can tell you from 20 years of working in med spas that things go wrong in lots of different ways. Medical boards receive complaints from employees or from patients, and they investigate and sometimes take disciplinary actions against the physicians. Nursing boards and other professional boards get complaints, investigate, take action. Occasionally, for the unlicensed people who are operating these businesses, when things aren't done appropriately, there's the risk of criminal indictments, and we've seen these for unlicensed practice. And then we've seen that's all at the state level, and the local level. At the FDA level, federally, we see that the FDA is repeatedly investigating. My memories go back to the days when there were providers of what was like a generic Botox in the middle 2000s, and we saw criminal investigations by federal prosecutors for folks that were buying these generic forms of Botox, which were, of course, illegal products that were federal criminal offenses, to not only to use them, but to actually just receive them. And the FDA has a lot of tools in its arsenal. It can take administrative actions, it can send out subpoenas, it can send out warning letters. And then of course, you have other risks of patient lawsuits for malpractice and deceptive marketing, unfair competition cases, and the whistleblower cases. So there are risk issues here that we need to think about when it comes to the guidelines. Let me turn to the places where I think the guidelines really need some work. As I mentioned, to me, corporate practice of medicine has been one of the trickiest issues. This is a place, so many people in the med spa industry are people who came to med spa out of a passion for aesthetic work, but who are not licensed professionals, and are business people and entrepreneurs who wanted to develop med spas, and it becomes very important to navigate carefully these rules around what constitutes the practice of medicine, who is allowed to actually own a practice, who's allowed to hire doctors and professionals, and who's allowed to provide what services. This is a place where really the rules are. I can tell you, I personally am somebody who sets up businesses to comply with corporate practice of medicine in many cases that are operating in 50 states, and these rules are profoundly different around the country. Really radically different how New York thinks about these from how California thinks about these, from how Florida thinks about these. So it's very, very important to go state by state, and they're highly variable. And when I read the AmSpa guidelines, and I understand that the guidelines have to be short, but it's almost comical how short and how brief they are, and the attempt to, while it's admirable and well-intentioned to try to simplify these points, it's also dangerous, and it's not a place that's appropriate for in my opinion, for AmSpa to try to really put out a consistent standard. I think that's the place where we get into trouble. The other issue is really around devices, and I think this is very important to understand. All of the devices that are generally the devices that are used in med spas, lasers and other non-ablative devices, tend to be almost without exception Class 2 medical devices, right? The FDA classifies devices based on their risk, and a Class 2 medical device is, in all instances, a legend device, meaning it says this device is intended to be used by physicians. The reason that that happens is because the manufacturers of these devices do not want to be at risk for inadequate instructions. And so in order to ensure that the devices are used safely and that the manufacturers are not at risk, when they file with FDA, whether they are filing for a brand new device for a full approval or with a 510K, basically trying to take advantage of a past device, the manufacturers are deliberately classifying these as medical devices. This creates enormous confusion because some of the devices increasingly have become very simple to use. And this is a place where we've spent a lot of time, and frankly, where I mentioned up front, even the state enforcement folks are in many cases confused. The problem is that what this means is that you can't rely safely on all of the you don't have any assurances that there's going to be a protection on AmSpa standards. So, for example, I can tell you when I read in the AmSpa guidelines 5.01 talking about microneedling, irrespective of death, can be delegated to LPNs. To MAs, medical assistants who are unlicensed people under the direct on-site supervision of a physician or NP or PA. I can tell you that I have personally sat with the medical board and the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, and they do not feel that way. I can tell you I have received letters in the last 6 months complaining about microneedling being done by unlicensed people. And microneedling is just the tip of the iceberg. We've seen that with virtually every kind of therapy that the guidelines suggest can be done by a medical assistant. I can tell you here in California, that doesn't fly. And frankly, it's a problem in all of these states because the structure of our medical device laws makes the federal government, not the state, the overseer and determiner of the status. I have the word statutes is on my slide, but it should be the status of devices. And so I have serious concerns that these guidelines try, in the interest of trying to present a simple, consistent standard, are simply misstating the requirements. And I think it's a risk point, and I think it's something that needs to be revisited. So I wanted to just talk about what my fear is. The problem is I work a lot on trying to get people to be in compliance, right? And so compliance, when you talk about what is compliance, compliance means very different things for small organizations than it does for large ones. Generally, it means having a set of rules that are followed, that are enforced, where there's an attempt to really make sure that they're well communicated, that people are trained on them, and that there are real standards, that there's essentially a self-policing in the organization so that the work is being done internally to stay in compliance. And the problem that we often see is that if you have policies out there, if you have policies and procedures, for example, in your business, and they're not followed, that is an open invitation for the government agencies that police, that regulate, and for frankly for private lawsuits to come in and say, look, lo and behold, you had a policy, you had a procedure, you didn't follow it. It was sitting collecting dust on the shelf in your office. Isn't that the proof that you accepted that as the standard? And courts routinely treat policies and procedures that businesses have adopted but not followed as prima facie evidence of not meeting standard of care and of negligence. And so too, when we see organizations like AmSpa, trade associations that members have signed on to, and that the businesses have said that they are committing to, when they put out policies and procedures that organizations are not following, there is a massive risk that you have essentially provided evidence for judges to decide what the standard of care is. And that's a problem. I just lost my screen. I'm going to go back. Sorry. Apologies. So this ties into lots of places, right? When you have policies that are either inaccurate or not followed, when you don't train on them, that's another risk point, right? When you have a gap between the communication and the reality, when you sign on to organizations that put out standards that are not enforced, you're not actually helping yourself, right? The key is to think about these things, to actually have policies and procedures and to have training that actually match what's being done. Just in the same way that there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant, there's really no such thing as being a little bit compliant. Compliance is a process, and it concerns me when it's seen as being something more simplistic, as a simple state of being. It's really a place where you have to be careful. So I wanted to just make a pitch before I conclude and turn it over to Warren on what's the value of trying to actually think about these things in more thorough ways. Number one, you demonstrate. There's always three words that I always use when I talk about compliance. Three values: integrity, transparency, and accountability. Number one, you demonstrate to the world, to the government, to your patients, to your workforce, that you are an organization committed to integrity and accountability. Number two, you improve the quality of care through actually engaging in proactive processes to be in compliance. And number three, you protect yourself from directors and officers by showing that you are actually living up to your duty of care. And it concerns me when we see documents put out that are potentially creating a risk for and not making people safer, but making people more vulnerable. So I want to just offer a few final takeaways. Number one, you have to be very careful wherever you're operating your med spa. The laws, the regulations, and most of all, the enforcement are state specific, and they're in flux. We see that constantly in the states that I advise in. I see constant movement and differences from state to state. As nice as it would be to have really simple one-size-fits-all answers, that is simply not the way our system works. Number two, I think we have to be really careful about oversimplifying complex problems and to acknowledge that these are businesses that have some complexity to them. And I think we have to be careful about making sure that you're working with people who are experts in your state. It's critical to understand the interplay between state and federal zones of oversight, and really to understand that with respect to the medical devices being used. And I think that finally, membership in organizations can make you responsible. It certainly opens up judges and opposing lawyers in cases to argue that you were part of an organization that had standards and that you should be held to those. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Warren and back to Crystal Clear. I really appreciate the opportunity. I want to thank Crystal Clear for including me in this program, and look forward to participating when we get to the questions and answers.
Really appreciate you taking the time again, Harry. I know you've got a super busy schedule. It's an important topic, and we appreciate you weighing in. So thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.
And now we want to bring Warren. Are you ready to go? So
I'm ready to go.
So let me just do this because you put a lot of effort into this, and I know where your heart is on this, and just want to remind everybody that, like Harry had mentioned, this is about participating in the community dialogue. I think it's all done respectfully, and after hearing Harry's comments, I'm confident that the world will be a better place as a result. So I'm grateful for that. Next, we have Warren Danforth, is the owner of Spa 35 Medical Spa, which launched operations in 2006. Warren is a leader in medical spa marketing and non-surgical cosmetic technology. He has been a frequent guest on Crystal Clear's podcast, True to Form, revealing awesome insights into the medical spa industry, and we can all learn from that for sure. By delivering outstanding services, working with great people, and leveraging digital marketing, Spa 35 has earned more than 400 five-star customer reviews and created a reputation for excellence among its clients and within the aesthetic industry. Warren is here to share his knowledge learned over 30 years in sales, marketing, information technology, medical spa industry. He has a well-established practice that would not likely get a lot of negative exposure because he's been around and well-established practices for so long, but he does have some really good insight into how he thinks this will impact you and the industry at large. So with that, Warren, we're going to turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Hey, just a quick overview of my background and kind of the perspective that I bring to the business. I started off my career in the private practice in California in telecom. So that's one of the original people in the cell phone business, and I kind of grew up in the regulatory world. So I watched that technology go from a heavily regulated environment into a free market environment. So I've kind of seen from the telecom side the impact of regulations on business. And then I moved to Idaho about 20 years ago, and I opened Spa 35 14 years ago. I spent a ton of time on the regulatory side. So like Harry said, state regulations is what drives the business. So I hired what I thought was I think he's the best lawyer in the state. And the governor seems to think so too. The governor just made him a judge a couple of years ago. And I did a lot of work on the regulatory side to make sure that I was completely compliant with all the rules in Idaho. And everyone will have a different set of rules they need to apply to their business. But it's critical that you look at both the regulatory and the legal side and make sure you've got some really good advice. I'm a rules guy. I love rules. So first pass, I thought was great that we had some guidelines. As I dig into a little bit more, I think there are some opportunities for us to make some adjustments. I did talk to Alex quite a bit on Monday, and we had a very, very good conversation about my opinions on the guidelines. And I'm going to share kind of the business perspective of things and how the guidelines may or may not affect things kind of on the ground level. So there are a lot of things in the guidelines I agree with. From a consumer perspective, and I may talk about consumers a lot over the next 30 minutes. I'm a big believer that everything needs to be oriented to our customer. If you really think about it, the customer pays us all. So if we don't have a great business that's customer oriented, we really don't have a business at all. So we've got to have high quality, safe services for our customers, or we're all going to be in trouble. So it's good for us to have this discussion in general because our consumers expect effective and safe services. We've got to be compliant with state laws, and Harry mentioned this quite a bit, but there is a lot of visibility to our business. We are in cosmetic medicine, so it's we're not curing disease, so the bar is much higher on the safety standards for our businesses because really the benefit is only cosmetic, but the risk is real. And then I'm a big believer in training and oversight. One of the things I was taught is, decisions should be made at their level of expertise. And, I think sometimes the medical practice doesn't always seem to see it that way. Sometimes our rules and regulations have a tendency to put things in the view of people's certifications rather than expertise. And I'll expound on that. Now, some things I disagree with, and this is in all due respect to Alex, I think AmSpa provides a great value for the industry. And we need that role. I've been involved in organizations in the telecom world, and I think they're a little bit different than where AmSpa is in this level of their maturity. But Alex and I talk about that quite a little bit, and I think they've got a vision to get there. But when I look at the guidelines right now, I see them as almost like hiring a CPA who says, tell me how I don't get in trouble with the IRS. And I see that as kind of the lens that these guidelines have been built. And I think in the future, I'd love to get some more membership participation so that as we get together, we can kind of identify best practices and how we identify best practices into a set of rules, and we can use our consensus opinions to help drive state rules. Right now, the guidelines are pretty simplified. I mean, each state is very different, and I've got a couple slides on that. But I think they're oversimplified to the point where they're not really usable at the state level. My third point on this one is they're really not reflective of the real world. And a couple points. In many cases, I think they're great. But when they have things like, for a treatment plan, a physician must identify sites and dosage of treatment. I mean, I just don't see how that would apply to, say, a Botox treatment. I mean, if the physician is going to meet with someone and identify the treatment plan and identify the sites and the dosage, the physician might as well do it while they're there. So sometimes I think we've oversimplified what happens in the real world. And then I don't see the voice of the consumer. Really, this would be a kind of an industry perspective, but I don't see much voice of the consumer in anything that we do. So I'm going to apply that to these guidelines and all of our discussions. My biggest beef right now is that the timing's bad. I'm spending all my time. We were just having a discussion before this started about gloves. I mean, there's so much going on with COVID and how we run our businesses. It would have been nice if we'd had these guidelines 3 or 4 or 5 months from now instead of now. I did talk to Alex, and Alex explained that there's some things going on with Texas, and that he thought kind of the word was going to get out, and he wanted to release these guidelines, but before kind of the word hit the streets without AmSpa publishing them. But I do think it'd be beneficial for all of us if we could put this kind of in a request for comments stage instead of a published stage. Because as Harry said, the thing that worries me the most is that, AmSpa has kind of published these as, these are the standards of practice. And if you subscribe to AmSpa, you are agreeing that this is how your services should be delivered. And I don't think in all cases that is feasible. You know, from my perspective, these laws would be great. From a competitive perspective, I've got the ability within my organization. I could really follow everything in these guidelines and probably eliminate a lot of my competitors that are effectively enforced. But even with that perspective, I don't think the way they are right now, they're quite baked enough for us to adopt anything along those lines. I talked to Alex about this on Monday. You know, the way the guidelines are written, I view them as they're almost written like they're templates for state boards to adopt. And I don't think they're quite mature enough for that. So it makes me a little nervous when they're written like they're statute, but I think we're kind of missing, we're kind of blending two perspectives together. One perspective is, hey, AmSpa members, if you want to make sure you don't get in any trouble with any state board for anything, here are the things that you should do. And the other perspective is, if your state is considering regulations, here are some templates that they might adopt. And I think when we blend those two together, that causes a lot of confusion. The other piece I've really identified is it seems like the guidelines were built in the ivory tower, and I'm not sure if that will resonate with everyone. But it seems like some people got in a room and said, hey, we need to put these things together, and we're going to go out and we're going to look at all the law across the state. We're going to look at federal law, and we're going to create this consensus document, and then we're going to push that out to our members. And I think from an association perspective, I look at the association as a way for us to get together, identify kind of what's happening in the real world, and work together to build a document that we all own. And then some type of a group, a committee, a subcommittee, what have you, should represent the members, then vote on whether that's our position or not. From an association perspective, you know, Alex is working with Texas. He told me he's working with Texas to help them some drafts and rules, but I don't see an opportunity for the members to chime in and say, all right, if we're going to lead states down a particular path, here are the things that we think states should include within their statutes. And all members should participate in that. I think the AAFE already made some comments about dentistry, but there are a lot of people beyond doctors that are involved in this industry. I mean, if you think about some of the most prolific injectors, nurses, RNs, NPs are a huge part of the business, and I just don't see them having an equal voice. So I think we should all come together and have an opportunity to discuss rules like this, and then vote as members of the association, so there's some consensus among all of us. And then we can choose whether we agree or not agree, and decide what the future holds. And here are the things that trouble me the most, and these are once again kind of reflective of what Harry said. When the rules say that we're going to follow these irrespective of our state, for me, that's an issue. I've spent a ton of time with lawyers and with the nursing board and the medical board and health and human resources. I mean, I've put a ton of work together to make sure that I'm compliant with state law. And when my association comes in and says, all right, it's great that you did all that, but we've got this whole new set of regulations that you need to follow, it doesn't sit real well with me. And I think it creates some risk on my side that I didn't have before. And then in states where the rules are not as strict as these guidelines shall be followed. I've got a couple of slides on that, but I don't know how you report to two authorities. I mean, AmSpa is taking this position that we're the authority and you should do it this way. And then I've got the state telling me something else. And those two don't blend together. So as an industry, I don't think we can have these two sets of authorities. The state and the federal laws are the laws. And we have to build our businesses towards those environments. So for AmSpa to tell us, you know, follow these rules, I just don't think flies. And here's my Idaho slide. So, you know, one size did not fit all. I said it before, you know, I moved from California to Idaho because I'm not a big believer in bureaucracy, but, you know, I happen to be working in a state that, you know, the vendors come in and say, you guys are in the wild, wild west. And our governor loves to go and talk about. He went and met with President Trump and got an award or some kind of ceremony about Idaho is now the least regulated state in the country. So while we're going down one path on our side to become consumer driven and to eliminate bureaucracy and eliminate regulation, and we're not big believers in this state of oversight, on the other side, we've got AmSpa arguing for more oversight. And it really creates a challenge to build your business in a competitive environment where for me, the #1 injector of allergen products in the state is a dental hygienist. I can turn on the radio right now and there's an esthetician who does dermal fillers on the radio right now. I mean, every time I turn the radio on, I hear her. So I'm just not quite sure how I can take the AmSpa regulations and apply those into my particular state environment. The other piece too, I think one of the things that we work on as an organization is what's the vision for cosmetic elective services? And I think one of the things that when I look at the AmSpa regulations, I look at a scan of the legal environment, and here's how not to get in trouble. And from my perspective, I see this awesome opportunity all of us have ahead of us in trying to figure out how do we maximize the opportunity so we serve our customers and we also give them safe and effective service. So I think there's kind of this a discrepancy. I'm looking towards the future and I want AmSpa to drive the future, and AmSpa in these guidelines is trying to drive today. So this is a gap we've got. This kind of highlights the fact that when you build your organization, you've got to build your organization around the state that you're in, and the state drives the medical services that can be delivered by each provider. So the scope of practice, the services that they can oversee, how they can delegate. There's all kinds of rules across the medical board, the nursing board, whoever regulates your medical devices, the dental board. So I think to simplify within the AmSpa guidelines, one way of doing things is it doesn't do us a whole lot of good when each state is so unique. And the other piece is, we build our businesses around the regulatory environment that we operate in. So, for me, I'm pretty conservative. I mean, I've got 2 nurse practitioners and 3 RNs. So I've kind of overdone it on the compliance side, but many people don't do that. So we've all got to build our businesses around the environment that our state puts together through laws, regulations, admin rules, and things like that. And I don't think that looking to AmSpa to help us change how our business operates is effective. The other huge piece is there's big implications on staffing, and staffing drives wages. So particularly, we're going to talk about this, in Article 3, they really talk about who should be using devices. I've got a couple issues on that, but from a business perspective, you got to make sure that your cost structure is in line with your competitors and what your customers want. And I don't think the AmSpa applies to all the states on that. I do think there's some opportunities on the business process side that it can help us improve our business process. But once again, it gives us this one view of the entire state or the one nation, and that really doesn't work. The rules without enforcement, I think it's just silly. To ask someone to voluntarily raise their costs to providing services by upscaling all the providers because AmSpa thinks it makes us more compliant is not realistic in a real world. So if safety is the real issue, I think there's got to be a better mechanism to go back and find the people that are the ones that are creating the biggest issue and come up with more targeted perspective to make sure that the bad players are identified. But to tell all the good players, raise your costs even higher because we've got a few bad players, I have a little bit of an issue with. Articles 3 and 5 are 2 in particular I had some issues with. Article 3 where the physician has to go in, they've got to do the exam. I can totally get along with that one. But to identify the treatment site, the device settings, the dosages, the frequency, I don't think is realistic. And decisions should be made at their level of expertise. And my perspective is, if someone is doing a treatment, they have the expertise to select the settings, the sites, the dosages. From my perspective, the physician, the prescribing authority, is necessary to identify and make sure that a particular patient is appropriate for that particular service. But to take it down to the level where the prescribing authority has to identify treatment sites and device settings, I don't think reflects the real world. And then Article 5, there's a lot of detail about what provider can do what service. You know, between the federal government and the whatever state board regulation of radiation devices, there's a whole nother slew of regulatory structures that are all around that. So to try to simplify all the other laws around this into this AmSpa overview is great in intent. I just don't think it's practical. The other piece I think about quite a bit is I was at the AmSpa show a couple of years ago, and I saw Dr. Rajani speak, and he made a comment about, you know, if you go back and you dig into the data, IPL is the most dangerous procedure out there. And we had a little discussion about it. If you think about it, you know, IPL is not a laser treatment. It's a broadband light treatment. And it makes sense that it's the most dangerous because you can't use selective photothermolysis theory exactly on it because you don't have a laser energy. So I go back and I look at the practical application of regulations back to devices. We don't really get down to that level of detail. And I don't think if we're looking at safety and making sure that we've got a safe and effective practices for our customers, that the AmSpa guidelines are getting us there right now. Increased legal risk. My perspective, I'm really concerned that these are published as final guidelines and that my membership implies that I agree with them. I expressed this to Alex. I'm hoping he's going to reconsider how he's got things posted on the website. But I really, really worry that for someone who has any type of an issue in the next few months, if AmSpa keeps these on their website, they may be held accountable that these guidelines dictate best practices. Turf wars. In Idaho, I've experienced this. The medical board published some rules a few years ago, and I had to get attorneys involved again. I just think we need to be very, very careful and get all the members involved before we publish things like this. So right now, in theory, someone could take these to a board, and we could have a battle between the board of dentistry and the medical board and the board of nursing. So I would really prefer if we all got together and decided exactly how would these roll out into our state, instead of publicly posting them, and I call it kind of a regulatory hand grenade. We've kind of pulled the pin, we've thrown it in the room, and then everyone's ducking, and it's just not good for anyone. Misalignment. So a few things here I see going on in the industry right now. There's just a great article I read. There's a company called 98.6. They just got, I think it was $118 million for telehealth. And if you look at the broader scope of where the industry going, there's really this telehealth pushing authority lower into the medical layers of medical practices. So we get more opportunity for consumers to get more services at a lower price, easier. And when I look at the AmSpa guidelines, they kind of push things back up into the old style. And that's not the way the industry, that's not the way the general medical industry is going. So people are streamlining things, people are going more telehealth. And when I look at the guidelines, they don't reflect that. The other piece I think that we all need to think about is the general impact on our society as we go through and we identify laws like this one or these guidelines to say physicians must do everything. We've got a physician shortage in the nation right now, and our leaders and our regulators and our lawmakers are trying to figure out how do we make the best use of physicians. So I think it's an opportunity for all of us to get together and say, how does the med spa industry contribute towards solutions to this physician shortage? You know, they're the brightest, most educated part of our society, and we need to be very careful about how we implement laws that restrict what our physicians do. You know, I talk to my physician when I go in for my my physical every year, and I'm just shocked at what he has to do. I mean, he's a very, very bright, educated guy, but he's just doing admin work days when I go in to see him. So it's just something to think about as we structure the rules as an association. we risk limiting options for consumers, and consumers pay the bill. So when we go through and we take the most conservative view of law possible, we tell people to raise the standard, there's the potential that we increase safety but decrease consumer options. And it's got to be a part of the conversation. If we're going to talk about how we deliver services, we're in the cosmetic space. Let's make sure that we're providing the best options to our customers who drive our organization to the people that pay our bills. And this is my what's right for the customer. We've got to have safe and effective services, but we've also make sure we've got a robust economy and a robust industry for our customers. So our customers have got choice, best price, best experience, and still have compliance to safety standards. And then what's right for the industry? Harry mentioned this. Our regulatory environments are driven locally. So to have a national standard where AmSpa asks everyone to go a step higher, I just don't think is realistic. We absolutely positively have to have laws, and we have to have compliance. But the right way to do things is to make sure that we're driven by our local lawmakers, our local regulatory environment, and maximize the training that we've got for our providers. And then make sure that the services that we're delivering are delivered in a safe manner, and put a framework for the laws around that are consumer friendly. The other piece I think is key is, as an association, AmSpa should be a spot for us to collaborate and bring all our best practices together and lead the industry rather than talking about what the industry is right now. I've done a little bit of work in the IT world, and we talk about a current state, future state. And I think that AmSpa regulations are a good reflection of the current state. I mean, they're telling us how not to get in trouble in the current state. And I would like us all to talk about the future state. I mean, where should the industry go? Is there an opportunity for us to differentiate between the cosmetic industry and curing disease? And how do we collaborate to make that happen at the state level? And so I think a better path forward is let's gather the safety data. Everyone identifies that we're under pressure because there are rogue players and there's some safety issues. Let's really identify what those safety issues are. It seems like we're taking a very broad brush into a few bad players. There's still plenty of opportunity, I think, to improve our training and certification process. I think AmSpa can be a great resource to the local regulatory boards, but putting out national guidelines and then trying to translate those into 50 different versions, all the different boards, is very difficult to do. And then as a group, I think we need to build a vision for where our industry is going. And how do we make sure we include everyone in developing that vision, and then make sure that all the members sign off and have some participation on what that vision is. And with that, I'm ready for any comments, or we're going to go into the Q&A session.
We are going to go into QA, and if Harry's around, he can pop back up, Harry. And Warren, first of all, thank you very much.
Here I am.
We can tell that you put a lot of thought into that and a lot of time and preparation. And as I mentioned at the outset of this program, nobody outside of me who actually has a business serving these folks has any financial interest in this whatsoever. So I really do appreciate both of you taking the time, and there are some questions, and I'm going to go ahead and I'll bounce off my screen and read the questions. Is that okay, guys?
Sure.
Yep. Do it. First question is, will we record this for later? The answer is yes. The second question, it says, for Harry Nelson or anyone else, what do you understand the structure of AmSpa to be? Private, corp, nonprofit? Do you know if Bertadotto has ownership interest?
I can tell you, I know that AmSpa was originally structured as a for-profit entity. I forget whether it's a corporation or an LLC. It is not structured as a nonprofit. And to the credit of its founder, Alex Thiersch, it was, there was an identified void that he tried to fill, but it raises, the question has an interesting, a good implication, an important implication, which is it may be appropriate for there to be an organization that's composed of really of its members and working for the benefit of the industry rather than a for-profit private structure. I can't answer the second question. I also know Michael Bird, and I'm very familiar and occasionally collaborate with the Bird Adato firm. So I can't speak to that question.
Alex is a partner in Bernardino, I believe. He runs their Chicago office.
He was, for purposes of full disclosure, Alex was, before he joined Bernardino, he was for about a year or a little more, was affiliated with my law firm. So, but he's been with them now since I think 2016.
Got it. So this is a simple question related to the guidelines. Does a patient need a Botox prescription each time they visit the office, or just once a year?
You know, in general, our advice is that a standard of care is specific to each kind of therapy. With regard to examinations, an annual examination to support, you know, even though cosmetic treatments aren't always thought of as being the same as medical treatments, the medical boards very clearly view them the same way. So for standard of care purposes, the safest path is to, unless a drug has a specific indication, for example, where the FDA has said it needs to be evaluated more frequently, which is, for example, that's the case with appetite suppressants, which are supposed to be reviewed every 4 months. Once a year is a sufficient thing. So, and the other question that this is not what the questioner asked, but I think it may help answer it, is the question is like, what does the examination actually consist of for Botox, right? What's the standard of care? Do you need to take cardiopulmonary vitals, right? That's standard of care. Is not. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor. Standard of care is really the question of what reasonable practitioners would do. A lot of people say, well, you should always take vitals, for example, just because to make sure that the person in front of you is healthy, nothing's going to happen. It may be that the simple questions about Botox for standard of care is, am I putting it into a place where it actually is going to have the desired clinical effect? I've been in interviews with medical boards, for example, where they question putting Botox in places where it doesn't actually, it doesn't work. And the second question is there a skin infection? So as long as there's no obvious changed condition, either in where the Botox is being put or in the patient's skin condition, from my vantage point, it is appropriate, to have at least an annual checkup. But I'm not aware of any state or local state requirements that would require more than that. But that certainly is a minimum standard that I think is appropriate to hold to.
Thank you, Harry. This next one is a long question. Warren, you can weigh in. It's directed at Harry. Question for Harry on something he and Warren both mentioned. Are AmSpa members at a higher liability risk if there is a regulatory or patient complaint where an opposing attorney can say that you are a member of AmSpa who has these guidelines that you should be adhering to, and we found that you're not complying? Will that hurt a practitioner that may have a complaint against them?
I'll start, and then let Warren, if Warren wants to add. It's an interesting thing. People always ask me as a lawyer. They say, what is my risk here? Am I at risk of being sued? What could I be sued for? And the problem is that in our system, we have a very entrepreneurial bar of plaintiff lawyers who, when they bring cases, are going to look for every theory, every fact, everything they can use to make a case. Our system, that's the way our system is built, and so. That's part of what I was really trying to underscore is I do think that there is a risk that if you are publicly, identifiable as a member of AmSpa, that an enterprising plaintiff lawyer could absolutely say, well, you've signed, you participate in this organization. Aren't you thereby agreeing that these are the standards? And I think that's an argument that a jury or a judge, depending on the case, would need to weigh. So I think there is a risk. I think if you are an AmSpa member, I think you need to appreciate that you're a stakeholder and that you could be affected by a standard that it puts out. There's no guarantees, but that's certainly a risk that's out there.
Okay. Harry, let me add to that. What could AmSpa do to minimize that risk? I asked Alex if he would relabel these and put them in a kind of a request for comments. The federal government does that quite a bit when they introduce new regulations. Could he change how these are posted so that they're kind of drafts and not finalized?
Warren, I think that's a great suggestion. I think, I made reference to it in the context of how regulations get published, but that's a fundamental part of the regulatory process at a government level. And I think one that AmSpa would do well to emulate, I know that other trade associations use, is to put out things as proposed guidelines and to take comments. I think that would help tremendously. to address that issue. The other thing I was going to say, I just wanted to add one other thought that you triggered for me, which is often I'll share with you over the last 20 years, I've been one of the most common things that we see that medical boards go after doctors for is inadequate record keeping, right? That's kind of the fallback. If you can't find anything was done wrong in the actual practice, you can almost certainly take issue with the records. If the records are handwritten, they're too sloppy to read, right? How is the next doctor going to read the records and understand? If they're done on an electronic system, they're cookie cutter. There's always, records are the most vulnerable point. And there's this issue that comes up anytime you articulate a standard, which is the standard of care actually what everybody's doing? Meaning this is what a reasonable person is doing should theoretically reflect what everybody else is doing. Or alternatively, is it an aspirational standard? And that's, by the way, a position that medical boards around the country constantly try to take. They don't want to hear the argument that, well, everybody who handwrites their records has, doctors don't have great handwriting. The state medical boards, one after the other, will consistently take this position that the standard here is aspirational, that you're expected to write clearly because some other doctor might need to review those records in the future. And that's what worries me with these AmSpa guidelines is they're not, and I think this is something that I really took away from your comments, is they should be calibrated to where people are, because that's, as somebody in this industry, as a provider, you want standards that reflect what's actually being done. You do not, there is a disadvantage in creating an aspirational standard of where it would be nice if everybody was. And I think that's one thing that's one reason I would support your idea of making these proposed and allowing for comments, which would allow also for expression of where the standards may need to be contrasted with practices in particular states or differences that are out there.
Okay, this is, I'm going to mush a couple questions together, Warren.
Sounds great.
One is, based on your conversation with Alex Tirsch, are you familiar with the process that AmSpa went through to arrive at these proposed guidelines? And then the follow-up is, what do you think AmSpa's motivation is to put these guidelines out? What's in it for AmSpa to do this? Why did they not talk to their members first? And I don't know that they didn't. That's why I put the two together. Sure.
I'm not aware of the process they went through. So I just became aware of this a couple of weeks ago. And when Alex and I talked, we did not talk about that. He did say that he is going to create a stakeholder group. He's invited me to participate, and I agreed to participate in that. So we are going to go back and take a look at these and get some stakeholder engagement. But I'm not aware of how they did it from a, I can't speak for Alex from a motivation perspective. What he did tell me is that, and he said that he has said this publicly, is that, if we don't get ahead of this, medical boards are going to do it to us if we don't do it to ourselves. So I certainly appreciate that perspective. But I think when you think about Harry's comments and how important it is to follow state and local guidelines, or state and federal guidelines, I just don't know how you do an overlay on top of what's already in place. It just doesn't seem to make very much sense.
You want to follow up on that, Harry?
No, I agree. I think it's a challenge. I think you could be setting up more more work for the industry than I think that I totally appreciate the intention of putting out a standard in the hope that gets ahead of boards, but I just don't think the boards or the FDA think that way. And they don't operate that way. So this creates issues for a burden for the industry. It does not create. I don't believe that this influences state medical boards.
And this is one from myself, Harry. I assume you've interacted with state boards in the past and seen these types of scenarios play out at a local, state, and federal level. What would be some of the recommendations you'd like to see based on your experience to create alignment? Because I think the biggest thing is alignment between the members and the associations and any potential liability, right?
So, personally, I would like to see really state by state rules. I mean, I can tell you, we have, when I start looking at it's a little bit head spinning when you go from Utah to Arizona to Texas to California. You see lots of variation, as Warren alluded. I'd like to see state specific guidelines. So I think, one of the things that we see in other parts of healthcare that we don't see that's missing here is a crosswalk, right? So it becomes very important to be able to crosswalk for those operators who are want to know how the rule fits in their state, I always worry because people can go on Google and find documents that are written 10 years ago and nobody and God knows how accurate they are. That it's very hard to find really accurate crosswalks. But I really think if what would be useful is to actually create that crosswalk so you can say, okay, this is what the supervision issue is for nurses in my state. Because I think if you don't do that, if you stay at the very high level and try to say we're trying to make one standard for everybody, you're first of all you're creating confusion and information that might putting people at risk. And like I said, I don't think and then the problem that Warren talked about, you're raising the bar potentially for the people in those jurisdictions that are more relaxed.
Okay, and follow up to that, do either of the presenters know what AmSpa is doing or trying to accomplish in Texas?
Well, Alex told me they're consulting in Texas, and that's I'm using that word. He didn't use that word, but they were working with the Texas Board of Medicine to help them draft a new statute or administrative rule.
I don't have anything to add on that. I did get a call. I think Alex was a little worried when he found out I was going to be speaking today, but I haven't spoken to him yet, so I'm sorry, I can't add to that.
We're all friends. We're all trying to get to the same place. And I guess I don't see any more questions right now typed in, but I have a few myself. So one would be, Warren, to you. What would you like to see? In other words, in your mind's eye, what would be the recommendations you would make to create alignment with the current state? You mentioned that a few times, and I do think your position on that is correct. How do we reflect the current state? Are there more uniform standards that you think are relevant and would make the industry better, or is it kind of? And the second part of that.
Well, I mean, I'm still struggling with why AmSpa.
Go ahead.
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit. I'm not sure if it's on my end or your end. Well, I just, AmSpa has already published a state-by-state list of regulations to help people at the state level. So I'm still struggling with why we're developing this national voluntary set of guidelines that everyone should raise up to. But, from what I'm hearing is that he's trying to make sure that we operate safely, which I completely get. I mean, if we're not safe, we don't have a business. But at the same time, we're all in our own competitive worlds. And like I said earlier, I mean, I'm competing against cosmetic surgeons who delegate to an esthetician that they pay $15 an hour to do injections. So I'm not sure how I raise my game and still stay competitive in the local marketplace. And related to that, AmSpa, I don't know how many members they've got, so I don't know if it's a appropriate answer or not, but we've already got interest. The dentists have already indicated they want to make sure they're included in this. If we look at the injectors, I mean, RNs are a huge part of this business, and they're effectively being told you can't operate the old way. You've got to make sure you've got a doctor or a prescribing authority in your office and doing things this way. And like I said in the beginning, from a selfish perspective, I think that's great. I can do all that stuff, but from a cosmetic elective medicine perspective, I think we're on the cusp of maybe getting big enough that we can start to drive some changes in regulation between curing disease and cosmetics. And I'd love to get Harry's input on whether we're at that point or not.
It's interesting. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, but I do think that I think that's one of the really exciting things to think about in the field is that we are seeing a robust growth in the market, in the therapeutics market, and I do think that wellness, we're seeing the combination of aesthetics and wellness is really moving quickly, and I do think we're going to be seeing a lot of new therapeutics, therapeutic devices, and we're seeing all kinds of ways in which med spas are moving, frankly, beyond the narrow description. When I looked at the guidelines and they described what med spas are, I have clients who are doing all kinds, or for example, doing nutritional wellness and IV and all kinds of injections of those nature, and I think we're going to see a lot of movement on that. I'm aware of a lot of kind of innovation there that I think really has a possibility of being transformative. So I think that's another way in which this document might be a little bit narrow. And I do think that's one of the most sort of exciting pieces of the med spa puzzle and the aesthetic wellness puzzle together, in the next decade.
There is. Can you guys hear me okay? I just want to do a mic check. Can you hear me now, Warren?
Yes.
Okay. So there was a comment that this particular attendee wants to go on record as saying AmSpa hired a Texas lobbyist and is actively trying to pass a bill there. Previously, they provided input to the Texas Medical Board, which chose not to implement their recommendations. The lobbyist said they wanted to pass. The lobbyist said they wanted to pass the guideline in Texas first, and then in the other 49 states. So they have. I won't share the rest of it because it's a little polarizing, but that's the comment, an on-record comment that somebody had. A follow-up question. Aside from that, what if the patient adds a different area? So this is the person who posed a question before about once a year versus each treatment. So it's what if the patient adds a different area? We have a pre-signed range of Botox for all areas of the face. If the patient comes back for a different area than the first area they were cleared for, can the RN follow this pre-signed standard protocol?
I go back. My answer doesn't change. I think as long as if the area was cleared in advance, and we're not talking about a contract. I've had the question come up before. We've had, for example, undercover agents in California go to med spas and ask for Botox in places where they wouldn't help, to test the consultants, to test the place and see if they're going to actually do Botox in places where Botox shouldn't be used. But I'm assuming from the question that this was somebody who, the Botox, there's no question about where the Botox is being used in it, whether it's for crow's feet. If it's a different part of the face, the only question I would have is, nurses should be trained to identify if there's a skin infection or some condition that's changed. If there's nothing obvious to suggest to the patient that there's been a change, then I think a treatment plan, could extend to multiple uses. In fact, what I would suggest for anybody who's thinking in that way, the best thing that can happen is that the doctor or NP or PA who's doing that initial treatment plan should actually write in order a plan that doesn't just cover the initial Botox. They should really be writing a plan that covers the year and what the frequency is and what the future treatments may be. To the extent that that plan is written really clearly, you're really making it safe and essentially covering those future services. If you haven't done it, it creates a little bit of ambiguity, but that's a risk. That would be a risk management recommendation.
There's one more question on the board, and this is for Warren. Question for Warren: did Alex express the possibility of AmSpa retracting the guidelines, which some like the AAFE have asked him to do?
I don't think our conversation got to that spot. So we talked for a little bit more than an hour, and we ran out of time, to be quite frank. So I think he's looking for input like this session and looking for the members to talk to him before he makes a change in his current position. He was pretty confident that where they are right now is where he wants to be. So I think if the members were to get in touch with him, that might change his attitude, but he did not seem inclined to make a short-term change.
Well, there you have it. Guys, there are no more questions up here. So just as a follow-up, once again, I want to thank you, Warren. I want to thank you, Harry, for coming on today. You guys are busy business people taking time out of your day. I'm grateful. For those who are listening, we will be releasing a recording of this across our social media channels. It'll be distributed across LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all those types of channels, as well as we will release on Monday or Tuesday on the True to Form podcast. That's TrueToForm podcast, anywhere podcasts are found. So Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, you can download there and record it, share it with your friends. Obviously, we encourage you to do that. I do want to make sure if anybody has a follow-up question for either of our presenters today, I want to make sure that we get you their contact information. So here's their contact information here. You have Harry Nelson, hnelson at nelsonhardeman.com, Warren Danforth, Warren at spa35.com. I'm sure if anybody was inclined to pose a direct email to either of our panelists, they would be happy to take a moment to respond. And so with that, we've got a small, Crystal Clear's got a small presentation we're going to do. But I want to once again make sure, guys, that you know, first of all, it was humbling because you guys are super knowledgeable in this, and I think it's going to open up a conversation in a very positive direction. So I'm grateful for that. And guys, thank you for taking the time. Warren, have an awesome day. You're welcome to stick around. Harry, I know you've got clients that are dying for your attention, and I appreciate you sticking around.
No, great to be with you again. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the continuing conversation around making MedSpa, making the industry work better. So thank you.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Okay. Audrey, you going to make me the presenter?
You can do it via clicking one of the circle icons at the top. I've already made you the presenter. I'm not sure why.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
No, I cannot. Give me 1 second.
Hey, guys. So while Audrey's doing that, guys, we're going to get my screen popped up real quick. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about, so obviously Crystal Clear, we're fully vested in the community, as I mentioned at the outset, and we just want to be able to facilitate a good conversation. I am close with the Bernardino folks. I'm friendly, very good friends with Alex, as well as Louis Melkmarker and any of the other stakeholders in the industry, Warren, and I just think it's a good time to facilitate that discussion. So with that being said,
You're good to go now.
All right, let's take a quick minute. We're going to talk about high impact marketing tactics to future-proof your practice. Okay, here's the good news, guys. So we're dealing with some real issues in terms of proposed guidelines and COVID, and that's kind of my thing. I'm an emotional person, for those of you who know me. My thing is, I think we've got a lot going on already, and we need to focus on that. How do we get our businesses back up and running and as profitable as possible? That's the bottom line. So here's a couple of statistics to consider. Average lead volume, treatments booked, and revenue were up. So we surveyed and pulled data from the more than 300 practices that we work with, and practices month over month up from May 2020 to July 2020. Average lead volume, treatments booked, and revenue were down in August compared to July. There's a little dip happened. However, 72% of practices reported an increase in patient activity and revenue in August 2020 compared to August 2019. So the recovery is in full swing. We know this, right? It's time to get back to work. A couple of important survey questions that we asked our existing clients. One was, how was patient activity volume in August 2020 versus last year in August 2019? Top 3 responses: up 1 to 25%, up, and you can see them here, up 26 to 50%, which is unbelievable. 15% of practices are up between 26 and 50%, and 3 up 51 to 75%. That number was, again, 15%. So clearly, as we mentioned, 72% of practices are back in full swing and active. And what separates them? It's patient communication. And this is where I'm going to park for a minute, guys, because what happened during COVID, so if you go back to March, right, that first week of March, where everything kind of fell apart, and our clients are all elective medical clients, all 400 of them are elective medical clients, and 90% of them, outside of the dermatologists and some of the more traditional medicine folks who also do wellness and aesthetics, 90% of them were shut down. So as you can imagine, it was an anxious time for us and for our customers. And so we had a front seat to which practices were able to weather that storm. And I'm not going to get into cash management, having cash on hand and the right insurance and all that, but I do want to talk about the ability to emerge from a crisis and then put your practice in a position where you can avoid some of that in the future. We're going to future-proof your practice today, okay? Number 1, phone. Got to have great, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Great way to communicate with customers by phone. Website, social media, email, and text. That's how people got through this. And then the question became, how did you do that? Right? So if you look at it, the number one point that I want to make today is the practices who thrived had spent a ton of time making sure that they had up-to-date patient databases with primary valid email addresses and mobile phone numbers associated with each patient record. It was a priority for them. In addition to that, they made sure that they had the ability to continuously update the website on a consistent basis. They had very, very detailed approach to communicating with patients and prospective patients with their social media channels, and also the ability to email and to text and stay consistently and frequently in front of their patients. That's the big takeaway from this conversation. You've got to make sure, you've got to go back and say, okay, what percentage of my database do I have emails, primary valid emails? What percentage of my database do I have mobile numbers? And then, of course, do I have a database, and this is self-serving because Crystal Clear, as you all know, provides software. It's called CRM software, which is client relationship management, that once you have those databases up to date, we have the ability to automate communication via email, via text, via social media, via the website. And the practice has to do very little to make that happen. So week one happens, everybody's anxious, right? And we had practices who canceled 600 appointments. 600 appointments, and I'm going to show you what they were able to do. But real quick, let's just go around the bend here. Number one, the website was super, super important, right? So you got to make sure that you've got a way to consistently publish content to the site. Number two was search engine optimization. We surveyed our customers. Over 30% said the number one way that new customers found them was through search engine optimization, which means somebody typed in liposuction, Botox, their town, they showed up on the first page of Google, and the new patient came to them. Now, the reason that's even more important than pre-COVID is because for those practices who didn't have great communication and who weren't updating their website and who weren't communicating well, it was an opportunity to steal patients. Those of you who have heard me speak before, you know there's only two ways to get a patient. A new entrant comes into the marketplace, somebody who's never done a treatment or a procedure before. That's one. And then the second way is that we steal them from each other. And that's fact, right? I mean, that should be your stated mission, is you want to take patients from other people and get them into your practice so that you can provide the highest quality care and optimize revenue, right? So again, what would apply? Site, SEO, social, email, having online events like this. Those are all things that would move the needle as people were on the merry-go-round looking for new providers. And we call that the pre-patient. So you have to find, you need to increase the quantity and quality of traffic to your website and phone. Next is, what do we do when we get there? So practices who emerged quickly, while there was some downtime, took the time to focus on their pricing and service menu, to focus on the treatments that they offered, to focus on the way that they communicate the benefit to those customers, to create a list of frequently asked questions, to create a list of the most common objections, to talk about how we deal with price objections, and then, of course, increasing the number of before and afters on the site and getting positive reviews. That was a great time during COVID to work on those issues. Now, the good news is, still have time, right? So while we're getting busy, and I wrote an article about this that got published, while we're getting busy, my concern is all these things that should have happened prior to COVID didn't happen during COVID, and now that we're getting busy again, are never going to happen. So in the terrible event that something happens again, I don't want anybody on this call to be in a position where they don't have the capacity to immediately communicate and stay in touch with their patient base, okay? So the way you make all that happen is through CRM software, right? And simply put, guys, it's a place to aggregate your patient data, phone number, email address, automate great marketing, automate communication, automate social posting, automate email marketing. It's the only tool that can do all that. For those of you who have it, many of you are probably clients, you know the benefit of that. But and it's self-serving to say, but I've never seen a time in my life where, and for myself, using a CRM tool, and we use our own, is so important because think about it, guys. You were shut down. Crystal Clear survived last year. We did 70 trade shows with 6 people. There are no trade shows. It's our #1 source of new clients. It's podium time and trade shows. There are none. So we had to reinvent the way that we do business because there's no podiums, there's no practice management workshops, there's no place to sponsor, right? So how do we stay in touch with you? Got on our ground game. We wanted to make sure that we optimized relationships with other vendors in the community. We wanted to make sure that we could stay in touch with our patients and our clients during the time that they were anxious, made sure that we could come up with payment deferral programs so that they could avoid payments for 60 days. And then we also had to look at our service and pricing menu. So we had to decrease what we charge for certain services. We even created a monthly specials program. And yeah, I'm psyched about it right now. It used to be $7,000 to sign up with Crystal Clear. It's $95 and includes a world-class mobile responsive website like a Dr. Miami. Dr. Miami is one of our clients, right? Go see what we built for him. You can get a website like that for free because it's not, and no payments for 90 days. So we had to look at the way that we pass cost on to you guys and say, hey, we need to do this in a better way, right? So the lessons apply to both sides of the coin here, right? You need to come up with creative ways to not only get people to come back, but also to keep them. And so what's one of the best ways that you can keep people? We want to look at membership programs, have proved to be very popular and very profitable. We want to look at automated engagement, where you can type something one time and never have to type it again. Make sure that we're constantly working on our before and afters over here, guys, and we're updating whatever CRM or database that we have so that we can stay in touch with our clients. And I want to show you one little case study, and then we'll answer any questions that we have, and then we'll get you guys on your way. So if you look at, I wanted to show some social media examples real quick about the level of specificity of this particular provider, Jen Perlman, where she says, after many weeks of intense preparation for our reopening, we are ready alongside our powerhouse team of nurses, pro-rejuvenation. Welcome. After many long weeks of quarantine and sheltering, we are ready. And look at the detail. Please arrive with a mask, hair, back, and makeup free, triage with biometric testing, escorted directly to treatment. Providers will be masked with face shields, nose and mouth filters for procedures, physical distancing. So it's not enough to say our med spa complies with CDC guidelines. You need to communicate, and you need to take advantage of tools that provide automation that allow you to communicate with great specificity to your patients and to your prospective patients, those who are considering coming to see you. And the more detail you can do, the better. And of course, these would be replicated across site, social, in your email marketing, in your search as well. But the one piece I wanted to show you that I think is really important, if you look at this little case study, the name of this practice is Mariposa Med Spa. Look at what happened to them. They were closed in March 2020 due to COVID. They had to reschedule 540 appointments, okay? They reopened May 1st by using these tools, site, social, email, texting was huge. They were able to do the following. 90% of patients were able to be contacted upon reopening, 10% were not. They recaptured 72% of patients and appointments in the first week of May. They recaptured over 80% of appointments in the second week of May. Only 2.9% of appointments canceled out of the initial 540. And their May 2020 revenue was up 3%. That's in the teeth of the pandemic. May 2020 revenue up 3% from May 2019. This is data derived directly from technology. This isn't anecdotal. So my encouragement, and part of the reason that I wanted to bring Harry together today with Warren is so that you know there is good discussion going on in the industry right now that is going to lead us down a safer and more profitable path, and we want voices to be heard. That's the #1 goal. Second piece of wanting to get everyone together today is so that now that you know that's going on and you can have a voice there, We need to focus on those things that will impact our business the most. And I want to leave you with two little tidbits. So my good friend Stanley Okoro said something once around content, because we're talking about content, automated communication, and marketing. And he said, you know, Tim, he owns a big plastic surgery practice and a med spa. He said there's two types of people that use social media. There are consumers and there are producers. Let that just kind of wash over you for a minute. There's consumers and there's producers. So he said to me, he chose to be more conscious of how much he consumes and spend more time focusing on what he produces for the practice. And it just hit me because I thought to myself, I talk to people all the time and they say, I'd love to put these policies, procedures, technology, marketing into my business, but I'm so busy. I'm always so busy. And I don't mean to minimize or diminish in any way that we are all busy. We are all busy. But then I started paying attention to my online consumption habits. I discovered pretty quick during COVID that I had a lot more time than I thought I had. And so what we encourage you to do is to bake into your schedule time to produce good quality content on the site, in your social channels, in your email marketing, in your creative text marketing. Spend some time to think about that process in your practice. You can get the technology from us. The technology is cheap. That's not a big deal. But it's thinking about, am I producing more than I am consuming? And then the second part, the second little tidbit I heard I want to leave with you today. I was with David Mandel, who is a partner, managing partner in OJM. They're a law firm that does wealth management for doctors and medical spa owners. And we were talking, he said, Tim, most important thing you can do right now is make decisions during COVID that your post-COVID self will thank you for 2 years from now. And that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Make decisions today during COVID that your post-COVID self will thank you for 2 years from now. And I thought, wow. So just with listening to those two thoughts, I've decreased the amount of time that I spend consuming social media, increased the amount of time I spend on topics like this. It would be very easy for me to say, wow, I don't have time to get lawyers and thought leaders, to key opinion leaders together to talk about AmSpa guidelines. Well, I do. And I have to take the time, right? Because I'm investing myself in the community and I want to be part of that. So I've got to make the time. Okay, so that's my encouragement. And then at the end of the day, it comes down to belief. For those of you who know me or have seen me speak, you know I talk a lot about belief. Belief means, do you really believe that you can do it? Because it doesn't matter what I believe, it only matters what you believe. Do you believe that staying educated and up to date, clearly you do, because you're on the webinar today. Do you believe that putting these simple procedures in place in terms of site, social, email, SEO, text, and combining that with automated marketing and having the right talk tracks and the right pricing and the right service menu and the right mindset, do you believe that that will lead to better patient care and more profits for the business? Better patient care and more profits for the business. If you believe that, you should give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. We have, like I said, a promotion for the calendar. It's on the website. Go to the website, crystalcleardm.com. And the promotion is $95 to get started with us. We build you a brand new website, no cost for the site, or tweak out the one you have, no problem, when you sign up for one of our marketing programs, and no payments for 90 days. So no payments till 2021. If you're interested in talking a little bit more about that, give us a call. Visit us on the website at crystalcleardm.com. That's crystalcleardm.com. Or call us at 888-611-8279. Love to do a demo with you, show you what we do. I appreciate everyone taking the time on the webinar today. I'm going to check one more time to see. And we just have a bunch of thank yous. So with that being said, guys, appreciate you taking the time today. Hope everybody enjoys the rest of the day today. We got the president and former vice president talking tonight, so that should be an exciting night, whichever side you listen to. And then we've got some football this weekend. So enjoy your weekend. Good luck out there, guys. And remember, we want to provide increase the quality of care and increase the profits. I think we can help you do that. Have an awesome day. Thank you.